I still remember the exact moment, crystal clear, like it happened 5 minutes ago instead of months. I was standing by the gleaming office coffee machine at Stratford Industries, carefully adding just a dash of oat milk to my morning blend, a small familiar ritual. That's when Ethan Harrison, the new CEO and, more importantly, the founder's son, strode into the break room. He didn't acknowledge my presence, didn't offer a polite good morning, didn't even crack a semblance of a smile. He just looked at me, his eyes coolly dismissive, as if I were merely a piece of outdated furniture he'd decided to discard. "Sarah," he said abruptly, his voice flat, devoid of any inflection. "My office. Now." It wasn't a request. It was a summons. My stomach did a slow, cold flip. I, Sarah Morgan, had been with Stratford Industries in Philadelphia for nearly 11 years. 11 years building the client services department from a two-person team into the powerhouse it was today. 11 years negotiating over 100 complex contracts. 11 years training most of the dedicated team that now sat just outside his inherited office door. But none of that seemed to matter to Ethan. His father, Mr. David Harrison, had built this company on grit, integrity, and loyalty. Ethan had simply inherited the title, and apparently, he believed it granted him the divine right to play God with people's careers. If you've ever felt undervalued at work, maybe hit subscribe on Life Stories. You might relate. Trying to shake off the sudden, inexplicable tension coiling in my chest, I followed Ethan down the familiar hallway towards the executive suite. He didn't offer me a seat when we reached his cavernous office, the one that still bore the tasteful, classic imprint of his father's style, not Ethan's flashy, modern aesthetic. He didn't even sit down himself. He just turned, leaning casually against the edge of the massive desk his father had commissioned years ago. "You're fired," he stated baldly, his voice as flat and emotionless as before. He shuffled some papers, avoiding eye contact. "We're restructuring, streamlining. We don't need lazy people dragging this place down anymore." I blinked, processing the words. Lazy? Me? The woman known for arriving early, staying late, meticulously managing every client detail? For a wild second, I thought it had to be some kind of bizarre, cruel, misplaced joke. "Excuse me?" The words came out before I could stop them, barely a whisper. He finally glanced up, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. "You heard me," he replied dismissively, already flipping through a different stack of papers on his desk, as if deciding what catered lunch to order. "You can collect your personal belongings and leave, effective immediately. Security will escort you out." I stared at him, utterly stunned. My heart began pounding a heavy, frantic rhythm against my ribs, the sound roaring in my ears. Every instinct screamed at me to shout, to demand an explanation, to list my accomplishments, to defend my 11 years of unwavering dedication. But somehow, through the shock and the rising tide of hurt, a different instinct took over, the ingrained professionalism, the refusal to give him the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. Instead, I drew myself up, lifted my chin slightly, and offered him a small, calm, polite, deliberate smile. "Understood, Ethan," I said, my voice remarkably steady. "Thank you for letting me know. Have a nice day." I turned and walked out of his office, my head held high, even as my legs felt like jelly beneath me and my insides trembled. As I walked back towards my desk, the open-plan office suddenly felt vast and exposed. My teammates, my friends, looked up as I passed, their faces etched with confusion, sensing immediately that something was profoundly wrong. A few started to rise from their chairs, ready to offer support, to ask questions. I gave them a subtle shake of my head, a silent plea. Don't make this harder than it already is. I packed the contents of my desk, the photos, the well-tended desk plant, the industry awards, into a standard cardboard box in a numb silence, acutely aware of the pitying glances and the hovering presence of the uniformed security guard. As I drove home through the familiar Philadelphia streets, memories flooded my mind, sharp and poignant. 11 years. 11 years. I had given Stratford Industries more focused time and energy than I'd often given my own family, especially during those early years after my difficult divorce when work became my refuge. Late nights finalizing proposals, weekends spent strategizing, holidays interrupted by client emergencies, taking countless calls while holding back tears or exhaustion. I had poured everything I had into that company, believing in its mission, respecting its founder, Mr. Harrison, and trusting in the structure, the process. And now, dismissed, discarded, called lazy by an arrogant 30-something who wouldn't know hard work if it bit him, who had likely never faced a real professional challenge in his inherited life. But beneath the hurt, beneath the shock, a persistent question began to form, pushing aside the initial wave of anger. Why? Why fire me, specifically? Why now? Why the vague, insulting excuse of laziness? That question haunted me all afternoon and into a long, sleepless night. I barely touched dinner. Sleep offered no respite, my mind racing, replaying Ethan's cold dismissal over and over. Something about his demeanor, the utter confidence, the almost casual carelessness of it, didn't sit right. It felt rehearsed, yet ill-informed, and the timing remained deeply perplexing. We were, quite literally, on the cusp of finalizing one of Stratford Industries' largest, most complex contracts in recent history, the Apex Global deal. It was a multi-year, multi-million-dollar partnership I had personally cultivated and painstakingly negotiated over the past 6 intense months. I knew the client, Apex's CEO, Mr. Chen, inside and out. His priorities, his concerns, his negotiation style. I had prepared every document, anticipated every potential hurdle, even booked the final review and signing meeting for that very Friday. And now, just days before the finish line, I was gone. Had Ethan even looked at the Apex contract details? Did he understand the complexities, the nuances, the specific relationship I had built with Mr. Chen? Or had he simply seen my name on an organizational chart and decided to make an example, assert his newfound authority by firing a long-term, senior employee? The next morning, sleep-deprived and emotionally raw, I was nursing a cup of coffee I didn't particularly want when my personal cell phone buzzed just after 9:00 a.m. An unfamiliar number. I hesitated, letting it ring, unsure if I could handle another potential blow. Maybe HR calling to reiterate the severance terms, maybe Ethan calling to gloat. But curiosity, that persistent human impulse, won out again. I answered cautiously. "Sarah?" A familiar, authoritative voice inquired. A voice I hadn't expected to hear. "It's David Harrison." Mr. Harrison, the real CEO, the founder, the man who had personally hired me 11 years ago after a single, decisive interview, impressed, he'd said then, by my strategic thinking. A jolt went down my spine. "Mr. Harrison," I managed, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Good morning." "I just walked into the office," he said, and I could hear the barely suppressed tension in his voice, a low growl beneath the surface. "And I find your desk cleared out. Jessica in marketing tells me you were escorted out yesterday afternoon. Sarah?" His voice dropped. "Why the hell did you pack up and leave? What happened?" I hesitated for only a second. Loyalty was a two-way street, and mine had just been brutally severed. "Your son fired me, Mr. Harrison," I stated simply, factually. Silence crackled on the line. Then, a sharp, audible inhale. "What?" "Yesterday afternoon," I elaborated calmly. "He called me into his office and informed me I was being let go, effective immediately. He mentioned something about me being lazy and no longer needed." There was another long pause, pregnant with disbelief and, I suspected, rapidly dawning horror. When Mr. Harrison spoke again, his voice was slow, deliberate, dangerously calm, like a man trying to keep a volcano from erupting. "Sarah," he said carefully, did he happen to read your employment contract before making this decision?" I frowned, puzzled by his question. My employment contract? I hadn't looked at it in years. It was a standard senior management agreement, as far as I recalled. My contract? What do you mean, Mr. Harrison? He's supposed to finalize the Apex Global deal today, isn't he? Mr. Harrison pressed, ignoring my question. The final signing meeting? Yes, I confirmed slowly. We were scheduled to meet with Mr. Chen and his team at 11 this morning. Jesus Christ! The exclamation was sharp, followed by the distinct sound of papers rustling violently in the background, then a loud thud, as if he'd slammed his fist or a heavy binder onto his desk. Sarah, Mr. Harrison's voice came back, tight with controlled fury. Your contract, the one I personally negotiated with you when we created the Client Services Director role, it contains a specific clause, Section 7B, I believe. A clause I insisted on including after that disastrous Steel Ridge acquisition mess 5 years ago, remember? I vaguely recalled the Steel Ridge situation, a negotiation bungled by an inexperienced executive stepping in at the last minute. That clause, Mr. Harrison continued, his voice grim, stipulates that for designated Tier 1 strategic accounts, of which Apex Global is the prime example, you, Sarah Morgan, are designated as the sole authorized negotiator and signatory representative for Stratford Industries. It explicitly states no agreement pertaining to those accounts is legally binding without your direct participation and signature. I froze, the phone pressed hard against my ear, his words sinking in with stunning force. Sole authorized negotiator, legally binding. He can't close the Apex deal without you, Sarah, Mr. Harrison stated flatly. Not legally, not ethically, and frankly, knowing Mr. Chen's emphasis on relationships and trust, not even practically. Chen dealt with you. He trusts you. If anyone else tries to finalize this deal, especially after your sudden, unexplained absence, that entire contract, 6 months of painstaking work, will fall apart. Unless you are physically present in that room, representing Stratford. A slow, burning realization settled deep in my chest, replacing the cold dread. He hadn't read it. Ethan, in his arrogant haste to assert dominance, to make a power play by firing a senior employee, hadn't bothered to read the critical details of my contract, nor, likely, the specific stipulations within the multi-million-dollar Apex Global agreement itself. He had no idea what he had just done. And in that stunning moment of clarity, something inside me shifted irrevocably. The raw hurt of betrayal was still there, yes, a dull ache beneath the surface. But now, overlaying it, was something entirely unexpected. A sense of control. A sense of leverage. He had aimed his shot carelessly, impulsively. And now the bullet was ricocheting directly back at himself. Mr. Harrison hung up abruptly, without another word, leaving only a dial tone and the palpable echo of his contained fury. I sat motionless on my living room couch, the coffee beside me long gone cold, staring blankly at the wall. He didn't know. His own son, the newly crowned CEO, had fired the one person legally required to close the company's most important pending deal, likely without even realizing the implication. I leaned back against the cushions and let out a quiet, dry, bitter laugh. 11 years of dedication, loyalty, meticulous work, and it all came down to this. A spoiled, impulsive man-child playing CEO, making catastrophic decisions with the same carelessness he might use choosing a video game character. But real companies, real multi-million-dollar contracts, don't have reset buttons. Stratford Industries, and specifically Ethan Harrison, were about to learn that lesson the hard way. For a moment, I wasn't sure what my next move should be. Part of me, the angry, wounded part, wanted to get dressed in my sharpest suit, march back into that office, and simply watch the spectacular implosion unfold as the 11 a.m. deadline approached. Let Ethan squirm. Let him fail. Let him face the consequences of his own arrogance. But another part, the professional part, the part that had invested 11 years in building relationships and ensuring the company's success despite its internal politics, hesitated. And beneath that, a quieter, colder voice whispered, "Don't just watch. Control the narrative." I didn't have to wait long for the inevitable panic to set in across town. At precisely 10:13 a.m., my phone buzzed. Caller ID. Ethan Harrison. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, another call from his office line. Ignored. Then a call from reception. Ignored. Then the main line for the legal department. Ignored. Then the accounting department head. Ignored. My phone screen lit up relentlessly, buzzing non-stop like a frantic Christmas tree. I didn't answer a single call, simply watching the missed call notifications pile up. The voicemail icon blinked insistently. With a morbid sense of curiosity, I finally tapped it open. Lily? Hi. It's Ethan. His voice was audibly strained, tight, the earlier arrogance completely gone, replaced by a thin veneer of forced casualness barely concealing sheer panic. Listen, about yesterday, I think there might have been a misunderstanding. Things were moving fast, restructuring. I think I might have acted too quickly. Point is, his voice cracked slightly, we need you, back here, today, like right now. It's urgent, really urgent. Please, call me as soon as you get this. Urgent, the word echoed mockingly in my head. Not a single, I'm sorry. Not even a hint of apology, fake corporate or otherwise. Just pure, unadulterated panic disguised as polite urgency. Interesting. I took a slow sip of my now cold coffee, still unmoving from the couch, letting him twist in the wind a little longer. At 10:32 a.m., my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a number I recognized but hadn't saved in years. Jessica. A former colleague, sharp and savvy, who had been in my department years ago before transferring to marketing. We'd stayed loosely in touch. I picked up immediately. Sarah, you will not believe what is happening here right now, Jessica said, her voice a low, excited whisper. Try me, I replied calmly. Ethan just got chewed out by his dad, publicly, like in front of everyone in the executive hallway. The door to the main conference room was open. The Apex files were apparently spread out. Mr. Harrison just walked in, slammed the contract down on the table, your contract, I think, and ripped into Ethan. My eyebrows shot up. Mr. Harrison wasn't holding back. He brought the contract? Oh yeah, Jessica confirmed, clearly relishing the drama. And according to Mark Jenkins from legal who was passing by, Mr. Harrison asked Ethan one single question, loud enough for half the floor to hear. Did you bother to read this damn contract before you fired Sarah Morgan yesterday? Apparently, Ethan tried to bluff, mumbled something about strategic realignment and reevaluating roles, but Mr. Harrison cut him off mid-sentence. He flipped right to that clause. You know, the one everyone always joked about Mr. Harrison insisting on. The Sarah Morgan sole negotiator clause for Apex and a couple of other big accounts. That clause. My leverage. I know the one, I said quietly. Well, everyone knew about it, apparently, Jessica continued, lowering her voice again as someone likely walked past her desk. Everyone except Ethan, it seems. Sarah, you should have seen his face when his dad pointed it out. He went white, like ghost pale. I think he finally realized he's the one who's about to tank the Apex deal. I exhaled slowly, a tight knot I hadn't realized I was holding, finally starting to loosen. And what did Mr. Harrison say then? He pointed at Ethan and said, clear as a bell, if this deal falls through because of your incompetence, son, your position here becomes negotiable. Then he stormed off towards his office. There it was, the first real crack in Ethan Harrison's inherited armor, the first tangible consequence. I don't know what you're planning, Sarah, Jessica added quickly, or if you even want to come back here after yesterday. But whatever it is, you definitely have the upper hand now. Big time. I ended the call with a soft, thanks, Jessica. I appreciate the update. Then I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the familiar Philadelphia skyline, calm and indifferent under the late morning sun. The city went on, oblivious to the corporate chaos unfolding within one of its glass towers. At 11:15 a.m., another message came through. This time, a direct text from Mr. Harrison himself. Sarah, I am sincerely, profoundly sorry for what occurred yesterday. I misjudged the situation with Ethan, gave him too much autonomy too soon. Please come in, not just for the Apex deal, though that is critical, but so we can talk privately. We need to fix this. It was tempting. The apology felt genuine, the offer to talk, to fix things, but I wasn't ready to just walk back through those doors as if nothing had happened, summoned like an obedient employee. Not yet. Ethan's mistake wasn't just about a clause in a contract, it was about a fundamental lack of respect, a blatant disregard for loyalty, competence, and 11 years of my life. It was about trust, accountability, dignity. Still, something stirred within me. Not petty revenge, but a desire for accountability. A need to see this through, on my terms. I picked up my phone and finally responded. Not with a call, but with a carefully worded text message back to Mr. Harrison. Mr. Harrison, I will consider returning temporarily to finalize the Apex Global negotiations, given my contractual obligation and commitment to the client relationship. However, my return is contingent upon specific, non-negotiable conditions regarding autonomy and reporting structure, which I would need to discuss directly and solely with you beforehand. I hit send. Then, I went to my closet, pushed aside the comfortable clothes I'd been lounging in, and began to prepare. By the time I arrived back at the Stratford Industries building, it was just past noon. I deliberately bypassed the employee entrance, instead walking through the main front lobby doors, like a visiting client or an external consultant. It was a small gesture, but I knew it would send a message. Everyone on the main floor knew I had been unceremoniously fired the previous day. My sudden reappearance now wasn't just a quiet return, it was a statement. Heads turned. Conversations paused mid-sentence. The usually bustling lobby held a palpable sense of tension, like the entire building was holding its breath. The main receptionist, a young woman I'd always been pleasant to, stood up abruptly the moment she saw me, her eyes wide. Ms. Morgan? Sarah? She stammered, clearly flustered. Mr. Harrison is expecting you. Right this way, please. As I followed her down the familiar executive hallway, I noticed the atmosphere had indeed shifted dramatically from the previous afternoon. The usual confident swagger was gone, replaced by a nervous energy. People peered over cubicle walls, their expressions a mixture of curiosity, apprehension, and perhaps, for some who knew the backstory, a touch of vindicated satisfaction. Mr. Harrison was standing just outside his office door when I arrived, waiting for me. He wasn't smiling, but his expression was serious, focused. Sarah, he said, nodding curtly as I approached. Thank you for coming in. I nodded back politely, but didn't offer my hand, nor did he offer his. He stepped aside, holding the door open, allowing me to walk past him into the familiar, imposing office. The massive oak desk, the leather chairs, the expansive view of the Philadelphia skyline, it all felt strangely distant now. I took a seat in one of the visitor chairs, placing my briefcase beside me. He closed the heavy door behind him, the click echoing slightly in the sudden quiet. He leaned against the closed door for a moment, letting out a long, slow sigh, the weight of the situation visible in his posture. I made a mistake, Sarah, he began, walking around to sit behind his desk, his voice low, weary. A significant one. I gave my son far too much authority, far too fast. I wanted him to step up, to prove himself capable of leading this company eventually, but I didn't expect... He trailed off, shaking his head. I didn't expect him to start burning bridges before he even learned how to build them. I remained silent, letting him speak. He met my gaze directly across the desk. What Ethan did to you yesterday was unprofessional, disrespectful, and frankly, catastrophically stupid. It jeopardized a deal we've poured resources into for over half a year, a deal critical to our international expansion. I nodded slowly. Yes, Mr. Harrison, it did. I reread your contract this morning, he continued. Every word. Section 7B. You were granted full, exclusive autonomy over the Apex Global account negotiations. Legally, the client won't, and shouldn't, recognize anyone else as the authorized representative of Stratford Industries during these final talks. That clause, he sighed again, was put in place specifically after the Steel Ridge debacle 5 years ago. You remember that mess. I remember it well, I said quietly. I was the one who spent 3 months cleaning up the fallout after an unqualified executive tried to strong-arm the client. His eyes met mine again, a flicker of shared memory, shared frustration. You didn't deserve what happened yesterday, he stated firmly, and I would like to formally offer you your job back, Director of Client Services, effective immediately. With full authority to finish the Apex deal. Whatever conditions you need to make that happen, within reason, we will make them work. There was sincerity in his tone, genuine regret palpable in the room. But this wasn't just about getting my job back or salvaging one deal. It was about setting a precedent. About leadership, accountability, professional dignity. I will return, Mr. Harrison, I said, my voice calm but firm, for the specific purpose of finalizing the Apex Global Agreement, as per my contractual obligation. However, I paused, ensuring I had his full attention. My return is contingent upon several conditions, formalized in writing before I step into that negotiation room. First, a revised contract addendum explicitly reaffirming my sole authority over the Apex account and outlining clear autonomy for its management moving forward. Second, a direct reporting line solely to you on all matters related to Apex. Third, and non-negotiable, zero interference, involvement, or communication from Ethan Harrison regarding this account or my work on it. He didn't hesitate. Done, he nodded immediately. Draft the addendum with legal right now. It will be signed before the meeting. There's one more thing, I added, my voice hardening slightly. This kind of arbitrary, disrespectful treatment. It can't happen again. Not to me, not to anyone else who has dedicated years to this company. There needs to be accountability, Mr. Harrison, real accountability. A long silence followed. He studied my face, then gave a slow, thoughtful nod. You have my word, Sarah. Changes will be made. With that understanding established, I stood. As I stepped out of his office, back into the tense hallway, I saw him, Ethan, standing further down the corridor, arms crossed tightly, pretending to be engrossed in a conversation with some junior executive, but his eyes locked onto mine the second I appeared. I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. I held his gaze as I walked steadily past him towards the main conference room where the Apex team was due to arrive shortly. And I swear, in that brief, charged moment of eye contact, I saw it. The flicker of rage, yes, but beneath it, the dawning panicked realization that his inherited control, his assumed power, was irrevocably slipping away. By 1 p.m., the large boardroom was prepped, coffee brewed, documents laid out. The Apex Global team, led by their CEO, Mr. Chen, was due to arrive any minute for the final signing meeting scheduled for 1:30. We had about 30 minutes buffer. I meticulously reviewed the final agreement documents one last time, confirming all the key points we had painstakingly negotiated over the preceding months. Mr. Chen was a sharp, no-nonsense businessman with keen instincts. He valued consistency and trust above all else. Any hint of internal chaos or last-minute changes from our side would spook him immediately, potentially jeopardizing the entire deal, even at this late stage. As I placed the carefully printed Arabic translation of the final terms, a gesture of respect I knew Mr. Chen would appreciate, onto the polished table, I caught sight of Ethan pacing agitatedly outside the glass walls of the boardroom, like a caged tiger. Mr. Harrison stepped out momentarily to intercept him. Their muffled voices escalated quickly, sharp and angry, until Mr. Harrison's hand shot up, palm out, silencing Ethan mid-sentence. Ethan's face turned a deep, blotchy crimson. He shot a venomous glare over his shoulder directly at me, a look filled with impotent rage and profound humiliation. Then, abruptly, he turned and stalked away down the hallway. That was the last I saw of him that day. At 1:30 sharp, Mr. Chen entered the boardroom with his two senior aides. I stood to greet him, offering a polite Arabic welcome phrase I had practiced. His usually stern eyes lit up with surprise, then softened into a rare, genuine smile. "Ahlan wa sahlan. You remembered," he said warmly in English, shaking my hand firmly. Respect, indeed, goes a long way. The meeting commenced. It proceeded flawlessly, smoothly, exactly as planned. We addressed the final minor queries, confirmed logistical details, and reaffirmed the mutual benefits of the partnership. 2 hours later, pens flowed across signature lines. We stood, shook hands again, the deal sealed. After Mr. Chen and his team departed, clearly satisfied, Mr. Harrison approached me again, the immense tension visibly draining from his shoulders, replaced by palpable relief. "You saved us, Sarah," he said, his voice thick with gratitude. "That was masterfully handled. I owe you more than just an apology." I met his gaze evenly. "You owe your company a leader, Mr. Harrison," I replied quietly. "One who understands the difference between exercising power and taking responsibility." He didn't argue. He simply nodded, a thoughtful, perhaps chastened expression on his face. Later that evening, walking to my car in the now dark parking garage, the adrenaline that had sustained me through the past 48 hours finally began to recede. The tension I'd carried, tight as a coiled spring in my shoulders, started to lift. I had done it. I had faced down the CEO's son, navigated a corporate crisis fueled by his incompetence, reclaimed my professional standing, and successfully closed the most important deal of my recent career. I had come back, not as a supplicant employee grateful for crumbs, but as a professional who understood her value and demanded it be recognized. But as I drove home, a sense of unease lingered beneath the relief. This wasn't over, not really. Ethan Harrison might have been publicly sidelined, humiliated even. But men like him, men accustomed to power, privilege, and getting their way, don't simply disappear quietly into the night. They retreat, they regroup, and then, often, they retaliate in more insidious ways. My intuition proved correct. In the weeks following the successful Apex Global signing, the atmosphere at Stratford Industries initially seemed to improve. The deal made positive headlines in industry newsletters. Stratford secures historic partnership with Apex Global. Breakthrough cross-border negotiation heralded. While the articles didn't mention me by name, attributing the success to generic, multilingual leadership and tailored strategy, everyone within the company knew who had actually navigated the complexities and sealed the deal. My internal inbox filled with quiet messages of congratulations and support from colleagues who had remained silent during the initial storm. Some were from junior staff I'd mentored years ago, expressing relief and admiration. Others came from mid-level managers who had previously barely acknowledged my existence, but now suddenly praised my grace under pressure and exceptional leadership. I accepted their words politely, but remained wary. Corporate winds shift quickly. The office mood lightened somewhat. There seemed to be less overt tension, more cautious optimism. Mr. Harrison had made it clear, through internal memos and restructuring announcements, that Ethan was no longer involved in any high-level strategic decision-making or client-facing roles, relegated to some vague special projects role, effectively neutered, until further notice. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was subtly off. Small, seemingly random errors began to occur, all oddly connected to my work or my team. First, it was minor administrative friction. Expense reports for my crucial travel related to the Apex finalization were inexplicably delayed, flagged for missing documentation that wasn't actually missing. Then, project proposals I submitted for routine approval were returned to me unsigned days later without explanation, causing unnecessary delays. More troubling incidents followed. An internal email, purportedly sent from my email address, containing slightly incorrect client data and strategic misinformation, was flagged by the IT department's security filters after it had already been forwarded to one of our key overseas partners. Luckily, the partner was someone I had cultivated a strong personal relationship with over years. He contacted me directly, confused by the erroneous information, allowing me to quickly correct the record and apologize for the system glitch. But the incident planted a seed of doubt, a whisper of incompetence associated with my name. I immediately reported the spoofed email to our internal IT security team. Their investigation concluded there was no sign of external hacking or system breach. The message, they determined, had originated from inside the Stratford network, likely sent manually from a shared workstation near the main break room, using credentials that somehow matched mine. That's when I knew, with chilling certainty, Ethan was behind this. He couldn't fire me directly anymore. His father had made that clear. So now he was resorting to sabotage, undermining my credibility, trying to make me look incompetent, careless, unreliable, planting seeds of doubt until I either quit in sheer frustration or Mr. Harrison himself began to question my capabilities, creating an excuse for my eventual, justified removal. It was a classic, insidious playbook of corporate sabotage, and sadly, it wasn't the first time I'd encountered it. Early in my career, fresh out of university at my very first job, I'd worked under a manipulative director who played the exact same game. He wouldn't confront his targets directly. Instead, he'd subtly cut off their resources, isolate them from important projects, badmouth them quietly in closed-door meetings, creating a hostile environment until the only viable option left was to resign, seemingly of their own accord. But I wasn't that naive, intimidated 22-year-old anymore. I wasn't going to be quietly pushed out. I wasn't going to disappear. I started documenting everything. Every delayed report, every unsigned document, every strangely misfiled client communication. Every instance where information I provided was later misinterpreted or lost. I kept meticulous records, forwarding relevant emails to my personal account, saving screenshots, logging times, dates, and specific details in a private, encrypted notebook stored off-site. I had learned the hard way, long ago, that in toxic corporate environments, well-documented paper trails are infinitely more powerful than emotional reactions or verbal complaints. Then, one late afternoon, returning from a client meeting, I overheard something that confirmed my suspicions beyond any doubt. I was walking past the small executive conference room near Ethan's new, less prominent office when I heard his voice, raised slightly, carrying clearly through the closed door. He was obviously not concerned about being overheard. "She's unstable, frankly," Ethan was saying to someone. "Since she came back after that incident, she's been erratic, aggressive even, making mistakes. I honestly don't think she's fit to manage high-pressure, high-value clients like Apex anymore." I stopped dead in my tracks just out of sight, my hand hovering over the doorknob of the adjacent empty office. "I'm just saying," Ethan continued, his tone dripping with false concern. "Maybe we need to start seriously thinking about succession planning for the client services directorship. She's clearly overextended, stressed, maybe nearing burnout." Another voice responded, lower, harder to identify, perhaps one of the newer executives Ethan had brought in. "But the Apex Global deal, Ethan. She pulled that off under incredible pressure just weeks ago." Ethan scoffed dismissively. "She got lucky. Pure luck. Chen likes her for some reason. We can't run a billion-dollar company based on luck and personal relationships." I stood frozen for another few seconds, the calculated venom of his words chilling me despite the warmth of the hallway. Then, quietly, unseen, I slipped into the empty office and leaned against the wall, taking deep breaths. My blood ran cold, not from fear this time, but from the icy precision of his malicious tactics. He was actively poisoning the well, planting seeds of doubt, building a false narrative to eventually justify my removal. That evening, I stayed late again, long after most employees had gone home. The office was eerily quiet, the city lights twinkling outside the large windows. I sat alone in the main glass-walled boardroom, staring out at the familiar skyline, wondering how many more of these silent, draining battles I would have to fight just to keep doing the job I was good at, the job I had earned. Just then, a quiet voice broke the silence. "Still here, Sarah?" I looked up, startled. It was Mr. Harrison, standing in the doorway. "I could ask you the same, Mr. Harrison," I replied evenly. He stepped inside, walking slowly towards the table, placing a plain folder down. "Your revised contract," he said simply. "With all the clauses we agreed upon, signed and executed." I nodded, reaching for it, opening it to quickly scan the language. It was solid, exactly as promised. "I've also initiated a comprehensive internal audit, effective immediately," he added, his voice low. "Focusing initially on system access logs, email integrity, and document management within the executive and client service divisions. Too many things have been misfiled lately." I looked up sharply, meeting his gaze. He held it steadily. "I'm not blind, Sarah," he said quietly. "And I'm not stupid. I know Ethan isn't finished." "Then why haven't you stopped him?" I asked bluntly, the question escaping before I could filter it. There was a long, heavy pause. He looked away, towards the city lights, his reflection faint in the dark glass. "Because," he finally answered, his voice sounding tired, more like a weary father than a powerful CEO. "Because I needed to see how far he would actually go. Needed undeniable proof." "You're protecting the company," I stated, understanding dawning. He shook his head slowly, turning back to face me. "I'm trying to protect both of you, Sarah, the company and my son. But maybe," he added, his voice barely a whisper, "maybe it's too late for one of them." I closed the folder containing my secured future. "I don't need protection, Mr. Harrison," I said quietly but firmly. "I need you to decide what kind of leader you are and what kind of legacy you truly want to leave behind." His eyes lingered on mine for a long moment, searching, perhaps seeing the steel beneath the surface. Then, without another word, he turned and left the boardroom. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that something much bigger, much more decisive, was coming. The atmosphere in Stratford Industries shifted palpably that week. The internal audit, initiated by Mr. Harrison himself, wasn't a secret for long. Conversations dropped to whispers when executives walked by. Nervous energy replaced the usual office bustle. Everyone knew an investigation was underway, centered around recent irregularities, and speculation ran rampant. People who had previously aligned themselves with Ethan grew cautious, distancing themselves subtly. Those who had felt marginalized or mistrusted under Ethan seemed to breathe a little easier, though apprehension remained. I wasn't asked to participate directly in the audit initially, but I knew my meticulous documentation of the sabotage attempts would be crucial. Deep down, I was relieved Mr. Harrison had taken this step. The truth needed to come out, not just for my own vindication, but for the health of the company and the morale of employees who had been walking on eggshells since Ethan's chaotic takeover. Still, years in the corporate world had taught me that internal audits don't always lead to straightforward justice. Sometimes truths get buried, inconvenient findings get minimized, and powerful figures orchestrate quiet exits with golden handshakes. The outcome was far from certain. That Thursday afternoon, I was formally summoned to the audit committee's temporary war room, an old storage area hastily converted, now filled with humming servers, stacked files, and whiteboards covered in complex diagrams and digital breadcrumbs. Mark Jenkins, the lead internal auditor, a sharp, impartial professional I respected, greeted me politely. "Sarah, thanks for coming in. We have a few specific questions regarding some recent system anomalies and document discrepancies." I nodded and took the offered seat. He pulled up a file on a large monitor. "First," he began, pointing to the screen, "this email flagged last month, appearing to originate from your account, but containing erroneous client data. Our forensic analysis confirms it wasn't phishing or external breach. It was sent from a shared workstation near the finance department break room. Crucially, the credentials used to access your account profile on that machine were manually entered, not automatically logged via standard network protocols." Meaning someone physically typed in my login and password, I stated flatly. Mark Jenkins nodded grimly. Or used credentials they had somehow previously copied or acquired. This wasn't a simple mistake or a system glitch. It was deliberate, unauthorized access. He paused. We're glad you reported the incident immediately, Sarah, because we subsequently found several other similar instances. Emails subtly rewritten after being saved as drafts, spreadsheet formulas altered in shared project files, approval sign-offs removed from critical documents after initial submission, all traced back to unauthorized access under your credentials, often from shared or unsecured workstations. The weight in my chest grew heavier, colder. This wasn't just random harassment. It was a coordinated, systematic campaign. This was intentional sabotage, I said quietly. Mark hesitated, choosing his words carefully. The pattern strongly suggests intent to discredit, yes. We've cross-referenced access logs, timings, and the nature of the alterations. We've also identified some unusual login patterns and file access activities linked to the executive assistant assigned to Ethan Harrison. I remained still, letting the implication hang in the air. We are not making formal accusations at this stage, Mark continued, but there is a clear documented pattern of activity designed to undermine your work product and potentially damage client relationships. So, what happens now? I asked, my voice steady. That, he sighed, is where it becomes complex. Mr. Harrison has asked us to present our findings directly to him and a select committee tomorrow morning. He has made it unequivocally clear he wants the full, unvarnished truth. No filters, no corporate spin. I nodded slowly, processing this. Then I'll be there, I stated firmly. Mark raised his eyebrows slightly. You're not required to attend the presentation of findings, Sarah. It's typically just the audit team and senior leadership. I understand, I repeated calmly but resolutely. But I will be there. If this truth is finally going to surface after everything, I intend to look everyone involved directly in the eye as it happens. He didn't argue. That night, sleep was elusive again, but for different reasons. I thought about the other talented colleagues, good people, who had quietly left Stratford over the past year, citing vague reasons like new opportunities or personal reasons. How many of them, I now wondered, had been victims of similar unreported sabotage campaigns orchestrated by Ethan? How much damage had his insecurity and ambition already inflicted on the company's talent pool? I arrived early to the executive boardroom the next morning. Mr. Harrison was already there, standing alone, staring out the panoramic window at the Philadelphia skyline, looking like a man steeling himself for an unavoidable storm. Mark Jenkins and two other senior auditors arrived next, carrying thick binders and laptops. Then Ethan Harrison strolled in, 10 minutes late, looking relaxed, almost bored, scrolling through his phone, projecting an air of untouchable confidence, until he saw me sitting quietly at the far end of the long table. He stopped dead in the doorway, his smug expression faltering. "What is she doing here?" he demanded, directing the question to his father. "She's not on the audit committee." Mr. Harrison didn't turn from the window. "She's here at my request, Ethan." Ethan shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable, but trying to maintain his bravado. "This meeting is supposed to be internal, confidential." "Then perhaps you should have kept your actions confidential when you allegedly used company resources and potentially coerced staff to fabricate emails under my name," I interjected, my voice calm but cutting sharply through the tense silence. Ethan scoffed, turning towards me. "That's a ridiculous accusation! Preposterous!" Mark Jenkins spoke up then, his voice neutral but firm. "Mr. Harrison, our audit has traced multiple instances of unauthorized access and document manipulation targeting Ms. Morgan's work product. These incidents consistently correlate with login attempts and file access patterns linked to your executive assistant's account, often occurring outside normal business hours or from unsecured workstations." Ethan's face began to pale. his practiced confidence finally cracking under the weight of documented evidence. "You're reaching! This is circumstantial. She's just bitter about being let go before." "You didn't just let me go, Ethan," I stated, looking him directly in the eye, my voice low but carrying the weight of 11 years. "You tried to sabotage my career, and in your arrogance, you almost tanked the biggest client deal this company has landed in 5 years because you couldn't be bothered to read a contract." Mr. Harrison finally turned from the window, his face grim, his eyes filled with a profound disappointment that seemed directed as much at himself as at his son. "Ethan," he said quietly, his voice heavy with finality, "I gave you a chance. More than one chance, truth be told. A chance to learn, to grow, to lead. And you have done nothing but try to tear down the very people who are trying to build something real here." Ethan's bravado completely crumbled. "Dad, this isn't what you think. I can explain." "No!" Mr. Harrison cut him off sharply, his voice regaining its authority. "It's worse than I thought, and it stops now." A heavy, suffocating silence filled the boardroom. Then, Mr. Harrison stood tall. "The board will be reviewing this full audit report this afternoon. Until their final decision is rendered, you are suspended from all duties, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building." Ethan opened his mouth to protest, perhaps to plead, but the words never came. He looked at his father, then shot one last look at me, not with rage this time, but with a dawning, incredulous disbelief, like a chess player who had just realized, far too late, that he'd been checkmated by a pawn he'd completely underestimated. Then, in silence, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving his ambition and his career in ruins behind him. I remained seated, watching him go. Mr. Harrison exhaled slowly, his shoulders slumping as if a great weight had been lifted, only to be replaced by another. "I failed him," he murmured, almost to himself, "as a leader, and maybe as a father." "You can't lead someone who refuses to grow, Mr. Harrison," I said quietly, breaking the silence. "But you can still lead this company. You still have that choice." He looked at me then, a long, appraising look. He nodded slowly, and for the first time since that awful Friday afternoon dismissal, I felt the suffocating weight on my own chest finally begin to lift, replaced by the first tentative rays of a new dawn. The weeks following that climactic audit meeting were focused on rebuilding and stabilizing. Ryan's suspension quickly became a quiet, unceremonious termination, announced internally via a brief memo citing breaches of ethical conduct and internal policies. The board, eager to distance themselves from the debacle and reassure investors, moved swiftly. There were no lawsuits, no splashy press releases detailing the sabotage, just a discreet exit, erasing Ethan from Stratford Industries' corporate history, though the whispers and rumors lingered. Mr. Harrison called me into his office a few days after Ethan's official departure. He didn't waste time. "Sarah," he said, sliding a folder across his desk, "I've spent a lot of time thinking about the future of this company, about the kind of leadership we need. You've demonstrated more integrity, resilience, and strategic acumen in the past month than many executives show in an entire career." Inside the folder was a formal promotion letter, Director of Client Strategy, a newly created executive-level role, reporting directly to him. I looked up, startled. "I didn't ask for this, Mr. Harrison." "I know," he said simply. "That's precisely why you deserve it." I considered the offer, the opportunity, the challenges. "If I accept," I said finally, "I want a significant say in how we move forward. I don't just want the title. I want to help rebuild this company's culture, ensure this kind of thing can never happen again." He smiled, a genuine smile this time. "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say, Sarah." And so began a new chapter. My temporary office became permanent as renovations created space for my expanded role. I worked closely with Mr. Harrison and HR to implement stronger checks and balances, clearer ethical guidelines, and perhaps most importantly, a truly anonymous whistleblower and reporting system, ensuring that no other employee would have to fear retaliation for speaking up about wrongdoing. I made time to mentor younger employees, particularly women navigating the often tricky currents of corporate life, sharing my own experiences not as a cautionary tale, but as proof that resilience and integrity could prevail. I told them, "You don't always get to choose your battles, but you always get to choose who you become while fighting them." As for Ethan, the last I heard through the corporate grapevine, he was struggling to find comparable work, his reputation quietly preceding him despite the lack of public scandal. Perhaps Mr. Harrison had intervened to prevent total public disgrace, a father's final, complicated act. I didn't inquire. It no longer mattered to my journey. One afternoon, walking through the bustling office, I passed the glass-walled boardroom where the apex global negotiation had taken place, where Ethan's fate had been sealed. I paused, reflecting. That single deal, that contract clause, had changed the trajectory of my career. But the real turning point, I realized, wasn't closing the deal, or even seeing Ethan finally face consequences. It was that moment, days earlier, when I smiled calmly in the face of his insulting dismissal and walked out of his office with my dignity intact, refusing to beg or crumble. That was the moment I reclaimed my power, not because I gave up, but because I inherently knew my worth, and I refused, finally, to let anyone, CEO's son or not, take that away from me ever again. The real win wasn't just keeping my job, it was rediscovering myself. Sarah Morgan's story is a compelling drama of corporate intrigue, resilience, and the ultimate triumph of competence over nepotism. Abruptly fired by the founder's arrogant and unqualified son, Ethan, just as she was about to close a critical deal, Sarah initially faced shock and uncertainty. However, a forgotten clause in her contract, combined with her own professionalism and strategic thinking, turned the tables dramatically. Ethan's impulsive decision, made without due diligence, became his own undoing. The narrative highlights the dangers of unchecked power granted through inheritance rather than merit, and the chaos that ensues when arrogance replaces competence at the leadership level. It also underscores the critical importance of understanding contractual details and the potential leverage they can provide. More profoundly, Sarah's journey is about recognizing and asserting one's own value, even after years of quiet dedication being overlooked. Her refusal to crumble under pressure, her meticulous documentation of subsequent sabotage attempts, and her calm demeanor during confrontation demonstrate quiet strength and strategic intelligence. She didn't seek revenge. She sought accountability and leveraged the situation to secure not just her job, but a position where she could implement positive change. The key lessons are clear. Competence and integrity are ultimately more powerful than inherited status. Understanding the details, like contracts, matters immensely. Maintaining professionalism under pressure provides leverage. And true vindication comes not from seeing others fall, but from rising above adversity, securing your rightful place, and using your position to foster a better, more ethical environment. Thank you for watching Sarah's powerful story of resilience and strategic maneuvering on Life Stories. If you've ever had to stand up to unfair treatment at work, let us know how you handled it in the comments. Please like this video and subscribe for more stories about navigating corporate challenges and finding your power. Know your worth and read your contracts. Until next time.